So the University of Wisconsin in Madison has a great book sale, and it happens twice a year. There's a spring sale, and there is a fall sale. The spring sale this year was right at the end of March and the beginning of April, that very weekend, and they rent out a room. Well, I mean, they don't rent, but they have a room in the um, main library, right, sort of in the main part of campus, um, where they have lots and lots of books laid out on tables, boxes of books under those tables to restock, and then there are even shelves around that get lined with books. They also have lots of records. I don't usually look at that sort of thing, but if you're interested in it, you could probably find lots of records there. I did glance through them briefly. Lots of polka records, as you might expect, but other kinds of records as well. But it's a great sale, and it's always a good place. It's mostly donations from the community rather than stuff that's been remaindered or deaccessioned from the library, and um, it's great for finding academic books. There's lots of other types of books, plenty of fiction and stuff, and we'll talk about one particular fiction book later. But that's why I always seek it out, is you can always get good academic monographs, American history, literary criticism, as well as stuff like medieval history or medieval studies, classical antiquity classics, that type of stuff, which is somewhat. It's not super hard to find, but it's like if you go to like any random book sale and you look around hard enough, whether it's a small town library sale, if you go to the right estate sales, if you go and look hard enough, you'll find a book that's worth your time. That relates to the history of the Civil War or World War II or something like that. And I, of course, enjoy both of those topics. But going to some place and finding, say, monographs on like medieval old French poetry or whatever is somewhat less common. So that's why I like to go there. But that's actually not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about first editions, and specifically modern firsts, which I am not really a first editions person. I'm a scholarly bookseller, focusing mainly on nonfiction, what I like to call specialist nonfiction. So stuff that's interesting not only to academics, but to dedicated hobbyists. But if I see something, I'll try and grab it. And you hear this expression, modern firsts, and there's different definitions that people use. But my non-expert idea is that anything where the dust jacket is important to the collectible value of the book is a modern first. If you go back before World War I, particularly the further you go back into the 19th century, dust jackets, if they existed, were only something to protect the actual, book, and any decoration, those Victorian cloth bindings is on the actual cloth boards of the book itself, or particularly if you go back even earlier, it's a leather-bound book, and it may or may not have, blind tooling or stamping or anything like that. But the dust jacket at that point is not part of the value of the book because there might not even be a dust jacket. But we're talking about from the early 20th century onwards, the dust jacket is in fact the main part of the collectible value of the book. It can be the difference between a book that has very little value and a book that might be worth $30. It could be the difference between a book that's worth $30 and a book that's worth $300. But first editions are tricky because it's not always as easy as just looking at what's on the copyright page. And so I thought I would show you an example that I found at the book sale. So there was a space at the bookseller where other booksellers had piled up books that they were going to purchase. And I noticed that in the pile, there was like a copy of some like Heinlein. And so I thought, oh, someone's already gone through the fiction section and picked everything interesting or really worthwhile. But I scanned through the fiction section and I found that they had left. Sorry, because it has projected with the Mylar, the light is reflecting off of it, had this. And I could just tell by looking at it, and this was only the part I could see, but I could just tell by looking at it that this was, like a 1940s or 1950s dust jacket. So I picked it up. I, of course, know the Caine Mutiny because of the famous movie and all. So I turned to the copyright page and I saw 1951, which seemed right-ish, for maybe to be a first edition. No other years, no other number lines. It didn't explicitly say it was a first edition, so I thought, to throw this in my bag of books that I'm going to purchase, it's a good gamble. I wasn't going to take the time to look it up there. And it was indeed worth the money I spent on it, but it's not the super collectible first edition, first printing. So that's what I wanted to talk about, is when is a first edition not a first edition? So what I'm talking about is not first editions versus book clubs. So book clubs, which is a whole other topic, is or there are editions of the book that are published at the same time, often with the same plates, with the same dust jacket art and so forth as the original first edition, but they are not being sold retail. They're being bought in bulk by some organization, like the Book of the Month Club would be a particular famous one. And the Book of the Month Club is then sending that book to its members who pay like a subscription fee. And these book club editions can have some value, but they are not the first edition, because they often say on the dust jacket down here, Book of the Month Club. Sometimes you can tell because they don't have any prices, because they were never intended to be sold retail. Sometimes, and this is one of the difficult things, as I've never been able to do this, but there are experienced people, is sometimes the Book of the Month Club, like the hardcover, is a slightly different size than the true first edition, but you'd really need like a true first edition and the Book of the Month Club to go side by side to compare them. So I just mentioned that, which I guess is a good classical praeteritio, a rhetorical technique used by Cicero to say that I'm not going to mention it. What I'm talking about is stuff that's not a book club edition, but it's not necessarily the collectible or the super valuable type of the first edition. So first editions can go through multiple print runs. There can be errors, they can be corrected, and because collectors often like the very first, form that the book was published under, they would like the version that actually has the errors in it. And so you could have a book that even explicitly states that it's a first edition. So in this particular case, what you see on the copyright page is actually different than what you'll see on the copyright page, I think, of the true first edition, if I remember correctly. But there are cases where it will be the same, or indeed even might explicitly state that it's a first edition, because they might be using the same printing plates for the copyright page, because sometimes the error lies elsewhere or that kind of thing. So you can have something that explicitly says it's a first edition or has the right number in the number line or any of that kind of stuff on the copyright page, and it still not be the first impression of the first edition that the collectors actually want. And this is something that's tricky because what you have is actually a first edition. But when people say that they want a first edition, often they want, or the one that serious collectors will pay much more money for, is the first impression or the first printing of the first edition. If it has, you know, any distinguishable differences between a first impression and, say, a second impression, not all books have that. You could just have a complete run of the first edition where there's nothing to distinguish any of the books from any of the other books, with no corrections or changes or that kind of thing. So this leads to what is in the book world called points, as in the points of the first edition. And these are the things that you know to look for. And I'm not an expert. There are people who specialize just in selling and dealing modern firsts, and they have all sorts of reference material and experience. They're not just looking it up online on a case-by-case basis, although you can find some information if you know the right lingo. Like if you know to look up, say, the Caine Mutiny First Edition points, you might get some information that'll help you. I'm not saying you should try and go and specialize in selling first editions if you're relying on Google searches to find information. I'm just saying is that often some of that information is available because it might pull up, say, a listing from an experienced bookseller when they are selling the book that is the first edition, first impression, and because they want to make sure that the people who are going to buy the book know that, they're going to talk about the points in the written description. So Google search will catch that, and they'll talk about, and they'll have pictures of the points in the listing, so people know that they're buying the right book. And so it's the sort of thing where you might want more to conclusively state that you actually have the first edition, but it is enough to, in my case, say, to rule out that you have a first edition, to exclude it and say, oh, this is not a first edition, first printing. So let's talk about this particular book. And points commonly include things like the prices that are listed on the dust jacket or printing errors, because prices that are listed on the dust jacket change as the price of the book goes up or down, and there are printing errors are often the reason why there's more than one, printing of the first edition, is because someone didn't notice something until they had actually already started printing the books. And so this is the case with this book. So if you turn to the back of the dust jacket, sorry, I'm trying to find it. Okay. We see here that we have the biography of the author, Herman Wouk, and here it gives the name of the first novel he published, City Boy, 1948. So this has the corrected version because the title of Herman Wouk's novel was City Boy with no definite article. However, in the first edition, someone made a mistake and they added a definite article, and they said the title of his first novel was The City Boy. And so someone caught that and changed it. And so this is conclusive evidence that this dust jacket is not the first edition, first impression dust jacket, which is the really collectible one. Now, I did want to say, if it wasn't clear, is in this case, the copyright page will say first edition. As you can see, this one doesn't. It just says 1951, which is the year of the first edition, but it doesn't say first edition because it's from that later printing. But like I said, sometimes companies will reuse printing plates. Sometimes it might even say first edition explicitly, even though it's a book club edition. And you have to know to look for those points. All right, once again, I've come to an end without really a firm conclusion. But I guess the moral of the story is, although you're not an expert, if you know the right lingo, you can probably find someone who, or find the information to exclude your book from being a very valuable first edition, because that is more likely than it in fact being a valuable first edition. Although I should note, I paid, because I went on the $5 a bag day, so I paid less than $1 for this book. And I can't remember what exactly it's priced at, but it's worth much more than that. And, if anything that's $10 or more is worth the shipping and the cost of the boxes and so forth. So, and that sort of fits at where I am in the book selling spectrum, is I'm not, finding or needing to find exceptionally rare or valuable material, as you can make a bread and butter living off of finding a book for $1 or $2. So if you went in the day when this was individually priced or found it at many libraries or estate sales, it would be $2 or $3. And I think even at that price, it would have been worth buying it, even if it's not the first edition, first impression, because you don't have to have something that's worth, hundreds of dollars in order to make a profit. All right, thanks for listening. All the best.